Hey, and welcome back to Tech Time. I'm Dan from sunny Los Angeles.
And I'm Matt from freezing Edmonton. We went from crazy hot to crazy cold in one day.
What kind of temperatures are you at?
Well, it's not too bad right now, but we actually had snow on the Trans-Canada up in Canmore near Banff and Jasper.
Really, in August?
Yeah, it's almost unheard of, and it's a little bit disappointing because I feel like I'm getting ripped off of beautiful weather, which we don't get a ton of here.
Back to your 6 months of winter, Matt.
I know.
Well, we have a lot to talk about today. I just wanted to say that we actually have a Twitter account, we have a Gmail account, and an Instagram account, so you can follow all of our travels and what we're up to. The Twitter account is at TechTimeShowPC. The Instagram is at TechTimeShowPC, and of course our Gmail is techtimeshowpc@gmail.com. All right, Matt, so we have a lot to talk about today. Let's get started. I looked in my news feed and there were 700 articles this past week. Did you find a lot of stuff for tech as well?
You know what? Yes, there was a lot of stuff on tech. Interestingly, a lot of it blurs different genres. So tech and politics, especially with Trump. And that was mostly today.
That's right. Didn't he tweet this morning at like 3 in the morning?
I'm not sure what time the tweet came out, but it wouldn't surprise me if he was tweeting at 3 in the morning. Doesn't that remind you of our conversation last week where we were talking about Gmails? You shouldn't be sending emails at 3 in the morning. You should probably have something similar with tweets.
I think if it's after 9 p.m., you're crazy.
I agree.
So it sounds like he wrote that Google is out to get him and that basically anything on Google is negative coverage about him.
He actually used a statistic. Now, he hasn't been known to be solid on his statistics in the past, but he said 96% of results on Trump news are from national left-wing media.
Well, that's a very, very serious situation, and I'm sure it will be addressed, right, in his words?
His words, yes. Very serious situation and will be addressed. So Google tweeted back, actually. They deny the claim.
Oh, yeah?
And yeah, they said their search engine is not used to set a political agenda, and we don't bias our results towards any political ideology.
Right.
Now, of course, they use algorithms to dig up news, and those algorithms are based on popularity. So websites that people are going to regularly, and if people are specifically looking up Trump, where are people reading it? Now, if those news sites tend to be, according to Trump, left-wing media, and they're the ones that people are going to and reading, then I don't think his problem is that Google is biased. It could be that people on the internet are biased. What do you think about that?
You know, I think a lot of people that are younger tend to go a little more left. That's not always true, but in some cases. And they're the ones that are doing more of the internet news reading. Huffington Post, of course, is geared towards that. And I'm sure they have amazing algorithms with Google to make sure that they're always top of the pick. And so I'm just not sure if the conservative news sites are doing as well and if they're able to figure out Google's algorithm to get to the top of the stack.
You know, I think there's more to it than just the Google's algorithm. Can media outlets actually pay money to Google to show up on the top of the search results?
You can certainly place an ad, and a lot of times ads will show up on the top. But when you're doing a Google search, you can tell what is an ad and what is actually produced by their algorithm. There's a little icon that says ad next to it when you're searching. So maybe that's what's got him confused.
Yeah, maybe. I remember reading an interesting article a few years back about a guy who was just graduating from university and he wanted to get an advertising job. And what he did is he Googled the names of the top 3 advertising firm CEOs, and he paid Google that whenever somebody searched for those CEO names, his resume showed up and a little blurb that said, "Hey, I want to get hired by you." And because he knew that they tended to be megalomaniacs to see what people are saying about them, he actually got interviews at all three firms,
Really?
and he had his pick. And he did that by using Google and paying for it. He Googles himself. He watches the news constantly, all about himself, to see what people are saying about him. So I don't know if you could actually twist towards bias with how much information is probably being written or talked about him at one moment. So I don't know. I think that this might just be part of his war against the media and maybe his personal bias. I don't know.
Well, that's hilarious. I'm curious to know how much that guy that wanted a job paid for the Google ads. One time I did a campaign for one of my websites and I just threw out a few $100s and it got ate up so fast. So he must have been pumping a lot of money into that for those CEOs to find him. Um, but yeah, it's interesting. I even heard Alphabet's shares fell by 0.8% today because of his tweet.
Yeah, it is interesting how when Trump tweets about a company, it usually does affect its stock price if it's publicly traded. I listened to a pretty funny podcast a while back. I believe it was Planet Money by NPR. They they created a bot that would buy and sell shares based on Trump's tweets of a company. And if the tweet was negative, they would sell. If the tweet was positive, they would buy.
Really?
Anyways, oh yeah, they made some money at the beginning, but the biggest problem they had wasn't Trump's tweets. It was the bot understanding whether Trump's tweets were positive or negative.
So I'm curious, what do you think? Do you think Google and Facebook and Twitter and all of these websites, do you think they affect the way that we vote and think about political issues?
Well, yes, absolutely. I think that's been proven with a lot of the fake news and the investigations into Russia that have come out recently. So, yes, I think that they do, and they have been manipulated and probably continue to be manipulated. But I think they're getting smarter and wiser on it. I think the biggest issue is, how do you separate truth from fake? You could probably do some quick fact checks, but I think you can't automate this with an algorithm. I think you need an army of fact checkers, and where do you separate opinion from fact?
Do you know anything about Alex Jones' site? I think that happened last week. Something about it being taken down.
I don't know if his site was taken down. I know that Twitter temporarily deactivated his account. I actually thought it was permanently deactivated because it was being labeled as hate speech. I know he's a conspiracy theorist, and he probably appeals more to those that would vote on the right side of things. But it's interesting is you do draw a line between free speech and being able to have an opinion that could be completely wrong and unbased on statistics and truth, but you still have a right to say it. But then, on the other hand, it's been proven that we need to stop fake news. So where's the line between opinion and fake news?
And a lot of it can be really offensive. I mean, there could be certain groups that are marginalized with the type of hate speech that you write on Twitter. With all of that aside, though, I actually like the media stream of Twitter that our presidents and CEOs and other prominent people are able to express themselves without having to go through some kind of a biased media like a newspaper or a news television station.
That's an interesting point, and I totally agree with you. I think what we're doing is we're getting the opinions of our politicians and celebrities, and politicians are celebrities as well, straight from their thumbs via Twitter. And it can come at 3 a.m,
like with Roseanne,
unfiltered,
yeah,
yeah, and drunk. Or
on Ambien,
drowsy.
Yep.
On Ambien, I mean, bring up Musk again, and so we are getting that unfiltered, and so on one side, I think it's kind of neat. We see the human side, the unfiltered side of these people, but on the other hand, usually the unfiltered and human side can be offensive at times.
You lived in Russia for a time. When you were living there, did you notice, were people talking about American politics? Were people interested in America or not really?
Oh, absolutely, they were. Now, I was there in the mid 90s, and also where I was played a big difference in what I was seeing. So I was in the Baltic republics, Latvia, Estonia, and Lithuania, and those three republics were very Western leaning. They all had their independent indigenous languages and cultures that had been part of the Russian Empire and part of the USSR for such a long time. And they were the first ones to break away from the USSR and wanting their independence again. So they were very Western leaning. But they also had a large Russian population. Latvia was almost 50-50, 50%
Really?
Latvian.
And did they speak Russian there too?
Yes, everybody had the spoke Russian because during the USSR, everybody had to learn Russian. But to speak Russian to a Latvian was offensive
Okay.
because they had been basically conquered and treated almost as a colony, even though they were part of the USSR. And so, anyways, to get back to this fake news, Russia kind of invented fake news.
Really?
Yeah, there's fascinating articles and investigations into especially what happened in the Ukraine and the annexation of Crimea. So, Russian journalists were paid full-time, paid by the Russian government to write up fake news that would turn the opinion of local Russians in the area against the Ukraine. So
Oh.
just like Latvia was 50% Latvian and 50% Russian, Ukraine, especially in the east, is mostly Russian. And so Putin actually claims that he was liberating the Crimean Peninsula from the Ukraine because they were already Russian people and they wanted to rejoin Russia. Well, he did that through manipulation of the media and fake news. And it really quite fascinating how he did that.
So there's no doubt about it that what people read in the newspaper or in any type of media can affect their opinion in some way.
Absolutely. No question about it.
Well, it's interesting how political we're getting today. The next thing I
Yeah,
wanted
we
to
are.
talk about actually is xenophobia and automation. So right now, there's a big push to stop illegal immigration. And a lot of the people, especially here in Southern California, that take the jobs that, a lot of the jobs like cleaning and other things are done by immigrants. And some interesting articles have come out this week saying that if we start doing more automation with more artificial intelligence, those jobs actually might not be able to be held by immigrants anymore.
That's an interesting thought. And, one of the things that you had mentioned earlier as well is that, automation maybe isn't just an immigration issue. Automation is an employment issue all across the board, whether it's immigration or whether you're born and raised in a country. A lot of jobs are becoming automated.
Even fancy jobs like lawyers, there's LegalZoom.com. I mean, nobody's safe, right?
I don't think anybody's safe. And even artists, they're starting to automate art. Now, I don't think they'll truly be able to get around that. And I think that people who are creative in nature, those types of jobs will still be very strong. But anything where you can create a database or you can crunch numbers or you can automate a vehicle, so truck drivers, taxi drivers, I've got a robot vacuum cleaner. It's not as awesome as when I personally vacuum, but hey, I prefer watching it zipping around my house than me taking my vacuum and going around the house myself.
Does your vacuum have a name?
Oh, yes. Yes, my vacuum's name is Rosie, after the Jetsons.
Perfect.
Yeah.
So Japan notoriously has a difficult immigration system. I lived in Japan for a few months, and it was really interesting how expats were treated and how really not a lot of people are immigrating to Tokyo. Apparently, there's a 6-month course that you need to take on Japanese culture and language before you're even considered for immigration. But what ended up happening with them is that their population, they're getting older, and there's no immigrants to take the jobs, and not a lot of kids that are taking the jobs of the past. So what they're turning to is actually robotics, and it's been fascinating to see the different kinds of things that they're trying to make robots do, whether it's help out in an old folks home or like your robot clean the house.
That's fascinating. Japan's always been on the cutting edge of robotics. And so it makes me ask the question, is it because they're so hard on immigration that it's now pushing robotics into that field, or is it the fact that that's some of the easier areas to automate, and because Japan's on the cutting edge, that's the areas that are getting automated first?
You bring up a good point, but either way, that population's getting older, and there's not a lot of people taking the jobs at the bottom, unfortunately. But speaking of Asia, Google right now is actually working on a web search for China, but it's going to be censored, and the government is going to kind of have control over what is able to be searched and not searched. Have you heard about that?
You know what? I didn't hear about it until you brought it up with me earlier today, and I'm wondering if this has to do with some of those high-level Google executives and engineers that all quit their jobs about 6 months ago, and they couldn't talk about why they were quitting Google. But I wonder if that has something to do with this.
Very possible. I guess more than a dozen tech NGO and human rights groups have issued an open letter calling for Google to stop work on the censored search engine project in China. So that's people like Amnesty International, Human Rights Watch, the Electronic Frontier Foundation, Access Now. They all released their letter to the Google CEO on Tuesday.
So do you think that Google has an explanation? I mean, weren't they the company that came out with the motto, do no evil? Am I quoting the wrong company there?
They actually retracted that. But I think
they like doing evil?
no, but it's no longer one of their points. I think they want a piece of the pie in Asia, and I think they see these other companies that are really moving ahead, and they feel like they're probably lagging a little bit behind. Now, their algorithms are wonderful for searching, but they're just not able to be in China at this point. So I think they're reaching a compromise with the Chinese government to still be able to work there and get the money from advertisement, but in a censored fashion.
Well, that does make sense, especially from a business point of view. Referring back to last week's conversation about how many internet users there are in China, and how that wave of internet use is probably going to affect the tech industry in the next couple decades.
It was 800 million. There's 800 million tech users there. And, I can understand why China would want to censor some things, but it's interesting. Can you think of some types of things that could be a human right that is having that search being censored could be problematic?
Well, from what I've read in the past, and this is from a few years ago, it seems like things that are getting censored would be any criticism of the government.
Okay.
That tends to be censored, and personally, I have a big problem with that. I feel like, born and raised in a democratic country, I feel like I have a right to complain about my government, and we also feel like we can make changes to our government through our ability to vote and lobby and write articles to those elected individuals. And so this censorship, I think it's mostly going to come down on censorship of people complaining about their government.
Well, there's no question free speech is important. So, off the political campaign, it sounds like iPhones are coming out and probably in a few weeks, and I hear there might be 3 different models, and 2 of them might even have a dual SIM.
Yeah, actually, that was pretty exciting for me to read that today. I just saw it this morning. As I mentioned earlier, I loved having 2 SIMs on my cell phone.
You've got a work sim and a home sim?
I had a work sim and a home sim. I've since gotten rid of my home sim because I found I really wasn't using it that much, and work was okay with me using their cell phone occasionally for personal use. But it was sure great for people who like to keep their personal life and their work life separate, but yet not carry around multiple phones. It was fantastic.
And for the international traveler, it's wonderful too. So I went to
Oh,
Spain
absolutely.
last month, and when I went to the airport, I found a cell phone place. And when I walked in, they told me I could get a month with gigabytes of data at LTE speed for 11 euro. And I couldn't
Oh
believe
my
it.
goodness.
Yeah, and the guy said, "You must be from Canada." And I said, "How can you tell? Is it my accent?" And he said, "No, it's every Canadian that walks in here cannot believe that you get a month for 11 euro with 5 gigs of LTE speed." And he said you can use it in any of the European Union countries, and until Brexit goes through, you can use it in the UK as well. And so, we went to Portugal, we went to Spain. I was in London for a little bit, and my cell phone worked perfectly, and I was streaming Spotify and going on Facebook. And so, if you had two SIMs, and you did a lot of international traveling, I'm sure you could keep them both in your phone and switch over, and that would be convenient too.
Oh, amazing. Yeah, absolutely convenient. You wouldn't miss anything on your personal SIM while you're using that international SIM.
That's
Yeah.
and you wouldn't have to worry about the passcodes that you have to put in every time you put in a new SIM. And if you forget the pass, sometimes you can get locked out.
Yeah. So these iPhones also what I found interesting about it is two of the three that are coming out are going to have OLED screens, which in my opinion is a much nicer screen.
Your phone right now has an OLED, right?
Yes, absolutely. And I love the blacks. Yes. Oh, yes. Because I had an old LCD screen, but my last phone was 3 years old. It was a One 2, and it had an LCD screen. And going from LCD to OLED, those blacks are black, and it saves on my battery when I use dark mode.
Oh, I had no idea.
Yeah, I love the OLED screens. Now, I know that it does cause a problem with iPhone's 3D touch.
Oh, that's right.
So it's not as easy, from what I understand, to use 3D touch through an OLED screen. Um, but personally, I've never had an iPhone with 3D touch. I think my Samsung Galaxy S9 Plus actually has 3D touch, where I've got multiple pressure levels just on the home button that I can use.
That's amazing.
Um, it is kind of neat. I like that feature, but it's really just more, it gives me a little haptic feedback to know that I've actually hit that right spot. But other than that, I don't see much of a use for it. How about you? Have you had any experience with 3D touch?
Just with friends' iPhones, I've never personally owned one with 3D touch. It just seems kind of gimmicky to me. There's some neat things you can do with the icons on the screen. You can press and hold and delete things or move things, but Apple always has another way to do it, so it's not a necessary thing, that's for sure.
Okay. Well, I'm curious to hear if any of our listeners care about 3D touch and if they'd like to see it stay on their iPhones and Apple figure out how to make it work with OLED screens, or if everybody's okay to let this disappear.
And it sounds to me like what they're going to do is they'll probably release the two OLED screens first. One's going to be a 6.1 inch and one's going to be a 6.5 inch, I believe. So different sizes. And then they were saying maybe a few weeks later they're going to do the cheaper LCD screen. And that's going to be the one that's really going to take off that everyone's going to buy. As far as price points go, I mean, for the bigger OLED screen, it's going to be more than $1,000, I'm guessing.
Yes, definitely sounds like it. I know that on the leaks that came out earlier today, they were actually thinking $1,000 would be the high end, because Apple does tend to price their most expensive model about the same as what they did the previous year.
Right.
The iPhone 10 was an exception, but I kind of feel like maybe they will, because they crossed the $1,000 barrier first. So they may stay around there. Who knows?
Now, rumor has it that the LCD model that's going to be popular is actually only going to use the A11 processor from last year. So it's going to be the same speed as the current iPhone 10. but it might have a little bit of a bigger screen. And have you heard much about that?
From the little that I read, is it's also going to only have one camera instead of two,
Hmm.
and probably use some intelligence in the programming to get that bokeh effect, which Google seems to have no problem with their Pixel phones.
Exactly.
Um,
Pixels, everyone that I know that has a Pixel loves the camera on it.
Yeah, that seems to be the big buzz about it, and they do take beautiful pictures from what I've seen. But remember, these iPhones are going to be going up against the new Pixels that are coming out at roughly the same time.
Hmm.
They're probably going to be announced maybe 3 or 4 weeks after this.
And against all of the Samsung phones that you already have. I'll tell you what, though, my favorite phone is the iPhone SE. It's basically the same size as a 4S, but it has the innards of a 6S. And I'm hoping the iPhone SE 2 comes out, that's maybe a little bit faster but still cheaper. I bought my phone for $170 2 years ago. I still love it. It's screaming fast. I will admit the battery's starting to go on it, but do you remember that controversy that Apple had a few months back when people were saying they were getting throttled because of their battery? Well,
Oh
because of
yeah.
that, yeah, now I can get a new battery for something like 29 bucks before the end of the year. So if that's you, if you have an iPhone SE or if you have one of the older models that qualifies, you can get an entirely new battery if you do it before the beginning of next year.
Do it.
Yeah.
I personally think the battery is the number one reason why a lot of people upgrade their phones. Yes, they slow down, and especially as iOS marches forward or Android marches forward and gets more interesting things and uses more RAM, yes, that will slow down your phone naturally. But me personally, my phones I usually replace when I can't get a half a day out of my battery. So I usually last 2 to 3 years and then my battery's toast.
It used to be that your phone would be too slow, and that's why you would want a new one. I remember when I had the iPhone 3G, I would open up my text messages, and it would take 30 seconds just to open up the text app with all of the new software coming out. And that drove me to get a new phone. Now the problem isn't whether it's fast enough to open programs or your videos. The problem is your battery is running out in a few hours.
And a lot of these newer phones, they're getting smaller, they're getting waterproof, and to get smaller and tighter and waterproof, they're using glue a lot more to
Oh,
seal up the phone.
okay.
And reading on iFixit.com, where they tear apart these phones and they talk about how easy it is to replace a battery, the newer, nicest phones are some of the most expensive and harder to replace the batteries because of the glue that's used on the screen and gluing the batteries in instead of the old school screws that used to keep them in place.
That makes sense.
So that's kind of, I mean, I love how thin my phone is. I love how it just fits in my pocket. But on the other hand, in 3 years, I'm going to hate the fact that it's going to cost me $200 to replace the battery.
Exactly.
Uh,
And this
so,
program Apple's got right now, I think it's like 20 bucks, 29 bucks to replace the battery. But you're right, it's in the older ones. I don't think it's with the iPhone 8 or the iPhone 7. It's the older ones that probably don't have the glue, so it's probably much easier to replace the battery on them.
and I love the old Samsungs where they had replaceable batteries. Just go buy your own and pop off the back and slap in a new battery. And it almost felt like you had a new phone. I remember the first time I did that and I was like, oh, it lasts a day and a half now. This is amazing.
And sometimes you could probably even buy a bigger battery than your phone came with in the first place, so bonus points there, right?
Yeah.
So a new Xbox thing came out. I believe it was today or yesterday. It uses the Netflix model. So if you go into a 2 year commitment for $22 a month, you get an Xbox One S, and you get like 100 games on their store that you can stream. That would be pretty neat. When was the last time you bought a console?
Actually, it was at Christmas time, and I closely looked at the Xbox One S. I was actually looking at the Xbox One X as well, because when I buy consoles, these are something that you're going to keep around for. for me, I usually keep them at least 5 years, sometimes even longer. I mean, I've still got my Wii, and so I seriously looked at the Xbox One X. The One S had just come out and was super cheap and sleek and looked really cool. And actually the main reason why I was looking at the Xbox One X is the rumor that they could come out with virtual reality.
Oh,
I
yeah.
I wanted a virtual reality console that was cheaper than going out and buying a $2,000 computer plus
The Oculus Rift or whatever.
yeah, $500 in accessories and a headset. So I was looking at the PlayStation, which had the PlayStation Virtual Reality, and then there was the rumors of the Xbox One X getting this virtual reality headset as well. Problem was, I was in the market at Christmas,
Oh,
and it
man.
was PlayStation that had the product. And so I bought that product, and I actually really enjoy it. But to be honest with you, we don't use it as much as I was expecting to.
Do you have the virtual reality headset for the PlayStation 4?
Yes, I do.
Oh,
Yeah, I got the
fun.
virtual, and I got the 4 Pro, which handles the virtual reality better. You get better refresh rates, and of course, the games have to be made for it. And a lot of the new VR games are, and they're sending out patches to older VR games that take advantage of it. I really enjoy the virtual reality, but one thing that I found is I actually can't go as long as I thought I could. 1 hour of virtual reality, and I'm exhausted. I have
Hmm.
a bit of a headache. I don't get motion sickness, but I'm done.
Do your kids love
Whereas,
it?
you know what, they do love it, and there's some really neat games that allow you to play with multiple players, which is great. So one person's got the virtual reality headset on, and then everybody else has their own little controllers, and they can control things on the TV that the virtual reality player doesn't see because they've got the visor on. And so there's lots of neat games, and that was one of my biggest concerns with virtual reality is it seems to be a one player only. Well, a lot of different developers have got around that by saying, hey, you've got a TV and you've got people wearing the visor, and they've come up with some really neat ways to do it. But that being said, I just find that we don't use the virtual reality system as much as I thought we would.
It's kind of like the Wii. Do you remember about, 6 or 7 years ago when everyone was getting the Wii? People that normally wouldn't play video games, suddenly they were doing bowling and tennis at every party. It would bust out. And then after a few months, it just kind of cooled it. Same thing with Rock Band. That was huge for a few months, and then it just kind of people stopped playing it. Do you think that's what's going to happen with virtual reality?
You know, a lot of people online are saying that they feel like it's stalled out. And if you look at the numbers, the number of units that are currently being purchased, if you look at the HTC Vive, and if you look at Oculus and PlayStation, those tend to be the three big ones. Numbers have stalled. They're still selling quite well, but they're not selling more and more and more, and you don't see that rise. A lot of people are saying that until we can get untethered virtual reality, uh, you're not going to see it really take off. And that's what the Magic Leap is trying to do. Oculus has a cheaper headset that just came out where it's a standalone unit, but it doesn't have the same horsepower as if you plugged it into an awesome computer. So I feel like we're still a few years away from having virtual reality where you can literally walk around without being tethered.
Now, tethered means that you have cables connected to the back, correct?
Yeah, that's correct.
And so without it, you'd be a little more free. And if you could get a few headsets for people in your family, or if you knew your friends all had headsets, I mean, you could do some really neat things. But one of the rumors I read today actually said that Xbox has shelved or put aside their plan on doing a virtual reality system in the near future. So it sounds like they're probably looking at the marketing, they're looking at the numbers, and I think they agree with what you just said that it's still a few years out.
Yeah, I feel like Microsoft has been a lot more conservative in their approach to games than, say, Sony, because they tend to be a little bit further behind in the cutting edge side of things, but when they do put something out, it tends to be quite good. However, it did make me disappointed to hear that they were scrapping it. Now, on the other hand, they have a great relationship with Oculus and Facebook.
Right.
And that's what I was actually hoping, that the Xbox One X, when it was developed, was created to take advantage of the Oculus being used on the Xbox One X. So I'm a little bit disappointed.
We're going to have to keep a close eye on it. And that's our show today. If you have anything you wanted to talk about, you can email at us at techtimeshowpc@gmail.com.
Talk to you next week.